So you might have noticed that I have a little more hair than usual this week. No, you didn't.
And Andy has less.
What's that?
Look at my hair.
It'll be back to normal when I'm back. Next time I see you, it will be short again. But I'll be wearing different robes. They'll still be black, but they'll be more formal than this one. Actually hotter than this one, so I'm looking forward to that. But assuming things go as planned, next time I'm here, I'll be a Zen monk. I'm going to ordain again. So the last time I ordained was not too long before I started coming here, probably just a few months before. But I announced this a few months ago in various places that I was going to ordain again, and it raised a lot of questions from people. And so as I started answering these questions, I realized I haven't really talked much about the process of ordination and what it means in Buddhism. And there's a lot that a typical American doesn't know about it. So I thought it'd be a good time to talk about ordination and what it is and what it isn't and that kind of stuff. So let me put this in a little historical context. So when the Buddha was alive, 2,500 years ago in India, it was customary for people at some time in their life to leave home, basically to leave the household life and go off and practice various forms of yoga and asceticism and things like that as a way to seek a kind of a spiritual life. So not everybody did this by any means, but it was accepted for someone who wanted to go and try to find a way out of the cycle of stress and suffering, to go into homelessness. So the Buddha didn't invent this. He actually saw people who had done this and said, I think I'd like to try that. So after his son was born, he went off and literally followed some holy men into a homeless state, left the comfort of a palace to go off and live in the forest. And so the idea was that living an ascetic life free from all attachments, including the household, was possibly a way out of the cycle of stress and suffering. And so kind of this first process was the process of going forth, leaving home. And so these ascetics would live under trees, they'd live in caves, abandoned dwellings, and things like that. And they would subsist on alms, so whatever they were given. And people would give them this stuff willingly, because they would hope that one of these people would find a way out of having to come back and live in ancient India all over again, right? Because it was very difficult to live in those days. It's not that much easier now, but back then it was real hard, and so people wanted to not come back. And so they were supporting these people who tried to live a holy life. So the Buddha lived an ascetic existence for about 6 years. He practiced very hard. And then he found a way out of this cycle of stress and suffering. And so he had been accompanied by 5 ascetics who they saw his dedication and how hard he was working, and they thought, well, he's going to get this figured out. And so they stayed near him until close. It may be where it is. Trust. So you're going all together? Okay, I'll just try sitting in here and see how that works. Close to the end of this period of 6 years, he started eating again. He had practically starved himself to death in these ascetic and very strenuous yoga practices and stuff like this. And so they thought he had given up. And so they left. But he really had just shifted gears. He was going to do something different. And so when he became awakened, the first thing that he did was go and look for his 5 companions so he could tell them what he had discovered. And so after he gave his first talk, which you've probably heard about, it's called Setting the Wheel of Dharma in Motion. It's the one where he talks about the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. One of those ascetics understood what he said and became enlightened just hearing it. And so he said to that ascetic, Ehi Bhikkhu, which means come monk. So he called him a monk. And he said, come. And that was the first ordination. That's the way ordinations happened back then. So the word bhikkhu, by the way, which is the word we use for monk, literally meant beggar. So the idea was that these first followers of the Buddha would be leaving home, going into homelessness, subsisting on alms, things like that. So they would be living as beggars. So many of the first members of the order of bhikkhus were actually converts from following others. They saw that the Buddha had been enlightened and they said, what's your teaching? And then they would go with him. The third teaching the Buddha gave is one called the Fire Sutra, which I've talked about here a long time ago. But he gave this to a group of 1,000 followers of another teacher. And after these 1,000 ascetics heard what he had to say, they all left and wanted to ordain. So he said, come on, monks. And so that was that. Within 10 months of his enlightenment, there were 1,250 Buddhist monks. And that there were actually more than that, but 1,250 of them had not only been ordained, but had become enlightened, including that 1,000 that he'd given the Fire Sutra to. So these all universally had no home. I mean, this was part of the process, going forth, leaving home, going into homelessness. They only ate what they received as alms, what was given to them. And then during the rainy season, they would assemble wherever the Buddha was. But then, except for his most immediate attendants, everyone else would leave at the end of the rainy season and go wander around and teaching the Dharma. And so if they talked to someone who wanted to become a follower of the Buddha, they would take them back to meet the Buddha during the next rainy season, and he would ordain them at that time. So, my first ordination was in the Thai order, and they still practice very much that way, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a little while. But when I started telling people I'm going to ordain again, one of the first questions I get is, well, I thought you were already ordained. Well, I am. But I'm ordained as a Buddhist minister, not as a monk. So I'll explain to people sometimes it's kind of like there are priests and there are preachers in Christianity. I'm more like a preacher than a priest. But it goes a little bit deeper than that. I'll explain some more later. But as I said, in Southeast Asia today, in some of the Theravada orders, when you ordain, you still live very much the way the Buddhist monks did 2,500 years ago. So when you ordain in the Thai order, you actually own very much. You give up, you leave home, you leave everything behind. You have 3 robes, you have an alms bowl, and that's it. You have to live in a monastery and all of that. So in a few countries like Myanmar and Thailand, ordaining is kind of considered sort of a rite of passage. And so a lot of men will ordain before they get married or anything like that. In order to kind of have that experience, it's considered making them sort of better quality people. So when I had studied at the Thai temple down in Kissimmee for a few years, and the abbot there had kind of gotten a promotion so that he could ordain monks, and when he did that, I went in there after he got back from Thailand, and somebody said, "Oh, Morris, you should ordain." And I said, "Well, I can't really ordain. I've got a wife and a job and a house, a mortgage and a car." And they said, "Well, ordain as much as you can." So I said, "Well, okay." So I kind of went back to work and I thought about it, and I had some vacation time accrued, and I could take some personal time on top of that, and I figured I could afford to take a little bit of extra time, so I kind of pooled that all together, and I went and ordained, and I spent that time off from work as a monk. So it's full ordination. At the time, I had a ponytail about halfway down my back, and my mom got to cut that off. And she said, "I've been wanting to do this for years." So I was like, "I don't want to lie." So there's 2 parts to the traditional ordination ceremony. The first part is going forth, and the second part is being accepted into the order. So the ordination ceremony in Theravada Buddhism is very lengthy, and it's very, very formal, and it's all in Pali, which once in a while I'll say something in Pali here. It's an ancient Indian dialect. And I had to memorize the whole thing. And I actually went back looking for the booklet that had my ordination ceremony in it. I couldn't find it, but it's online now, fortunately. And I looked and I went, I cannot believe I memorized all that Pali. But it took months to prepare. So you spend the night in a monastery beforehand, and then the next day there's kind of a procession around. There's a bunch of lay people who come to support you, and they follow you around, and they beat on drums and things like that. And then you shave your head. Or you don't shave your head. Monks shave your head. And your mom. And then you change clothes. You get dressed all in white, like a white pants and shirt, and then they put a white robe over that. And then you go in and ask for ordination. And so basically it starts with going forth. You go in and you say to your preceptor. A preceptor is the person who's going to ordain you. You say, I want to go forth, and so you have me do that, and so you start by going for refuge. And so going for refuge is, we've done refuge ceremonies here. If you decide you want to become a follower of the Buddha, you're basically saying, instead of going for refuge to relationships or money or my job or all those things that we normally go for refuge, I recognize that the highest refuge is my spiritual life. And so you go for refuge to the Buddha, to the teacher, and to the Dharma, the teachings, and the Sangha, the spiritual community. So you do that first, and then you say, okay, so I'm going to leave home now, I'm going to go forth, and so they give you a robe, and they give you an alms bowl. And then they take you back into a private area. Mine happened to be, there's a back room in the temple there in Kissimmee, and another monk helps you, and you get into your robes, which are really complicated. There's no buttons, there's no ties, there's no clasps or anything. It just kind of stays up just by magic and sheer willpower. It's not like these. So then you come back in. Now your head's shaved, you're in robes, you've got your alms bowl, and so you go back and now you say, okay, I've gone forth, now will you accept me into the order? And so there's another hour or so of chanting back and forth in Pali, and they ask you a bunch of questions and ask if you have various diseases and are you a human being and stuff like that. There are deities, like especially Nagas, which are sort of spiritual snakes, who want to become monks, and so they'll transform into people in order to ordain. Apparently they can't lie though, so if you ask them if you're a human being, they answer no. But anyway, so you go through this process, you're ordained, and that's it. Now you're a monk. So we went through all of this, and there's a certain number of monks have to be present for an ordination. And so there were several of them that had come from out of town. And one of them is the abbot of a temple in the forest in Thailand, but he was spending a couple of years in the U.S. kind of as a Dharma ambassador. And so he came, he was invited to come for my ordination. His name was Pra. Pra is kind of Thai. Anyway, Pra Bunsati. Pra means venerable. It's kind of the first title you get as a monk, is Pra. And so he was a super, super nice guy, very friendly, and I learned a lot from him. And we went back to the monks' quarters, and this was my first experience in the monks' quarters because I'd just been ordained. And he comes over and he takes my hands and he looks into my eyes and he says, Morris, you are a Buddhist monk. And it was like a jolt of electricity went through me. It was so profound to realize that I had made that step and that I had transformed in some way. And not just because I had on robes, but there was this decision that I had made to leave home to find a spiritual home. So, being a monk, even though my experience with it was very brief, it only lasted a few weeks, was really profound. It was an exercise in mindfulness all the time. You're completely dependent on the spiritual community. But at the same time, they're looking to you for spiritual support. Even though you've only been ordained 48 hours, they still value you because you've made that choice. You've gone into homelessness to try to find a way out of stress. And so you have to try to live up to that. And so that means you really have to stay on your toes. So I mentioned going for refuge. When you go for refuge traditionally in Theravada Buddhism, as a layperson, you'll take some precepts. And these are training rules. So you say, okay, I want to go for refuge. I'm going to abstain from causing harm. Basically, there's 5 of them. If you go for a retreat, you want to do something a little more intensely spiritual, you'll take 8 precepts or 10 precepts depending on the circumstances. When you become a monk, 227 precepts. So you don't memorize them all. And a lot of them are pretty irrelevant to day-to-day life today. For example, there's rules about what kind of wool you can use when you knit your sitting mat, which probably really mattered in India 2,500 years ago. It doesn't matter too much to people today. So as Buddhism expanded, it changed and evolved. And so when Mahayana Buddhism became a lot more open to, a lot more focused on layperson Buddhism, the ordination process changed a little bit. And so, and especially in Japan. Japan has had a number of situations, some of them kind of like the Protestant Reformation, some of them forced by political circumstances and things like that. And so, in some Buddhist traditions, now you ordain just under the Bodhisattva vows, which basically are a vow to become enlightened in order to liberate all beings. And if you'll take those, you're a monk. Around 800 CE Common Era, a Japanese Buddhist monk suggested that all the precepts be done away with except for one, which was the vow to awaken to the one mind of Mahayana. And he built a place for ordination up on Mount Hiei, which is outside of Kyoto, which is kind of the center of a lot of Buddhist practice. It's sort of out of town, but it's convenient. And so there's several different schools of Buddhism that have their main centers there. So in about 1100, Pure Land Buddhism arrived in Japan. And it came in thanks to a monk named Honen, who had studied a style of Japanese tantric Buddhism, and I'll talk about that one day. But it's kind of one where you learn a lot of different practices. And he encountered Pure Land Buddhism on a trip to China. And in Pure Land Buddhism, all you got to do is say Namo Amida Butsu, which is Japanese for I bow to Amitabha Buddha. And that's it. That's the whole practice. And he said, wow, that's pretty easy. I like that. And so he brought that back to Japan. And at one point, he was asked whether a Buddhist religious person should be celibate or not. And he said if it's easier for him or her to express their faith by reciting the Buddha's name alone, then they should be celibate. If it's easier to do that with a spouse, they should be married. What's important is only how one expresses one's faith. So in Japan, the idea of celibacy and some of the other precepts kind of went by the wayside, or they became a little bit more fluid within certain contexts. So I mentioned that I'm ordained as a Buddhist minister, and the organization that I did that with is called Bright Dawn. And Bright Dawn identifies as non-sectarian, but it arose out of a connection to Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, which is a form of Japanese Pure Land. And it was founded by a monk named Shinran. And he actually met Honen, became a follower of Honen, and they sort of started doing their own thing. They had some other followers and that kind of stuff. And then 2 of Honen's most prominent monastic followers were accused of some kind of sex scandal. And so the monks who were involved in this were executed by the government. And Honen and Shinran were sent into exile. Well, Shinran was stripped of his monastic status and they took away his Dharma name. And so he renamed himself Gutoku, which means foolish, bald-headed one. And he would describe himself as neither monk nor layman. And so he married, and he and his wife had 7 children. He was pardoned only a year or two after he was sent into exile, but he never went back to Kyoto. He decided to keep doing his thing, and so he kind of established this non-monastic teaching tradition, this place of being neither a monk nor a layperson. And that continued and sort of followed Japanese Buddhism into the United States. Also, in the late 1800s, there was a new government in Japan, and the emperor didn't like Buddhism. So in Shinto, which is the kind of national religion of Japan, the emperor is considered a god. And he didn't like Buddhism because, that might interfere with him being a god. And so he thought that it would help get rid of Buddhism if he decreed that monks could eat meat, take wives, and make their choice whether to shave their heads or not. And so this did lead to a kind of a secularization of Buddhism. But, it's ended up transforming into sort of a family business. So in the 1920s, there were even some regulations created by one of the schools of Buddhism that regulated how family temples could manage themselves and that sort of thing. So a lot of these questions became more management issues than spiritual issues. So when Buddhism came from Japan to the U.S. in the 1920s, 1930s, and so on, a lot of the Japanese people really wanted to assimilate. And so they started trying to look more and more like Americans. And so they founded the Buddhist Churches of America. And the church, their services began to look a lot more like Protestant services than Buddhist services. And Bright Dawn arose out of that. So that ministry tradition continues through there. So when I ordained the first time in the Thai order, I had been kind of, by happenstance, fallen into a leadership position of a spiritual community in Deland. And then within a few years, I was leading a community at Tomoka Correctional Institution. And I wanted to be able to do some of the things that ministers can do. Weddings and have confidential conversations with inmates and things like that. And so I was looking for something like a Buddhist chaplaincy program. And that's how I found Bright Dawn. So those two ordinations really were mainly so I could serve communities that almost by accident I had ended up leading. And I don't regret it. I learned a lot from that. And then when Kai-Tien wanted me to be a teacher at White Sands, he gave me Dharma transmission. So I became recognized as a teacher in his tradition too. But I still have that feeling or still want that feeling back that I got when Prof. Bunsati looked me in the eyes and said, "You're a Buddhist monk." There's something missing in being neither a monk nor a layman. And so I started thinking a couple of years ago that I wanted to become a monk again. And I looked at different options. I thought about going back to the Thai order. I thought about ordaining in Kai-Tien's tradition. But there are some things that I want to be able to do that certainly being in the Thai order wouldn't permit. And, some issues with Kai-Tien's order that may or may not work out. So it occurred to me one day that my initial interest in Buddhism was from reading things by Soto Zen teachers. And I had a connection to a Soto Zen community in Brevard County because there's a monk that comes up to the prison from there. And I knew his teacher. And so it occurred to me one day to ask him if he would ordain me. So we had two conversations, a year apart. And the second time he said, "I don't see any reason not to ordain you. You have to make your own robes." And I said, "Okay." And so I don't have to make this kind of robe. There's a ceremonial robe that's this wide and this high, and it's made up of a bunch of different pieces of fabric. It's like sewing a quilt. So I started sewing. And so I've been doing all of that for the last few months. And on August 12th at White Sands, I'm going to ordain. So I'm going to keep my Jodo Shinshu, my minister ordination. And that's okay with Koyo. I emailed him and said, "Here's what I'm doing," and he wrote me back and said, "Hey, keep up the good work." And I was worried about how Kai-Tien was going to react to it. But he's got a bunch of Soto Zen friends in Japan, and he said, oh great, I think that's wonderful. So there's some reasons I picked this. Soto is very authentic, but it's also uniquely suited to the modern world. It was founded by a man named Dogen, who was very progressive for his time, and his time was like the 12th century. For example, there's an essay called Getting the Marrow by Doing Obeisance, which basically means digging deeper into the practice by bowing, more or less. And he's talking about women. And he says, what's the big deal about being a man? Space is space. The 4 elements are the 4 elements. The 5 aggregates are the 5 aggregates. For a woman, it's the same thing. In acquiring the Dharma, all acquire the Dharma equally. All should pay homage to and hold in esteem one who has acquired the Dharma. Don't make an issue about whether it's a man or a woman. So in Asian patriarchal cultures, this is pretty advanced thinking. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but there's more stuff like that that I think makes Soto Zen very much suited for the modern world, and yet it's very grounded in its tradition. So I'm not going to move out of my house and go live under a tree. But I started thinking about what is it about being a monk that I'm wanting. And Kai-Tien he's the abbot of White Sands. He's not living at White Sands anymore. He's relocated to Dallas. They're building a new temple there. And I was talking to him, and he said, people keep asking me, when are you coming home? Or where is your home? And he said, I finally started saying, my home is the present moment. And I thought, that's what I'm looking for. I want to live in the present moment. I'm still going to have a house. I'm still going to go visit the spiritual communities that I visit and things like that. But I want to live there. Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen, wrote that a Zen monk should be like a cloud, taking shape and going where it goes according to circumstances. Just handle everything in accordance with the way in each situation. So there's another thing about clouds. They rain. You probably noticed that. There's a beautiful story in the Lotus Sutra talking about comparing the Dharma and the Buddha's teachings to the rain falling from the sky onto a forest full of medicinal plants. So in the world, there are many different kinds of plants, and they have many different properties, and they have many different needs. Some medicinal plants are good for the stomach, some cure headaches, things like that. Some need a lot of water, some need a little water. The rain falls without regard for any of those things, and it nurtures every plant based on its own needs. And so that's what I think Dogen, maybe another facet to what Dogen said about monks being clouds. We can put the Dharma out there and nurture the needs of those around us. So there's not going to be much different about me besides the robes. But Dogen said something else that I like. He compared becoming a monk to a thing called the Dragon Gate. He said vast waves rise incessantly in this place in the ocean called the Dragon Gate. He said without fail, all fish, once having passed through this place, become dragons, and thus the place is called the Dragon Gate. The vast waves there are not different from those in any other place, and the water is ordinary salt water. Despite that, mysteriously enough, when a fish crosses through that place, they become dragons. Their scales don't change, their bodies stay the same. So the way of Zen monks is also like this. Entering the monastic life, you will become a Buddha. You eat meat and wear clothes just like everyone else to stave off hunger and keep out the cold. But when you shave your head, put on the kesa, and eat gruel for breakfast and rice for lunch, you immediately become a Zen monk. To become one who passes through the Dragon Gate depends only on this. So next time I see you, I will be a dragon.